Here they stayed with hidden treasures and the prayers of the clergy until the sacking had stopped. The slaughter was so fierce that 5 years later, a visitor reported the plain was still covered with human remains. The destruction of Kiev left a scar on the Russian people that has yet to heal. In 1239, after more than a year of campaigning, the Mongol armies, tired but victorious, moved to the Ukraine to rest, take stock, and plan their next move. The Mongol advance to the edge of Europe was the furthest west any Oriental people had come since Attila the Hun 1,000 years earlier. The imminent encounter with Christendom would be one between two completely different worlds. The Mongols had an array of weapons that had never been seen in Europe. At the heart of the Mongol army was the archer. Whether mounted or on foot, he wielded a bow of terrifying power. This was the Asian or compound bow, made from yak horn and bamboo. Horn and bamboo were glued together and then bound until they set into a single piece. When the bow was strung, it was stressed against the natural curve, creating massive tension and allowing the archer to send an arrow much further and faster than any European opponent. And the Mongol arrow had also evolved into a sophisticated missile. By varying the flight and weight of the wood, the Mongol archer had a large selection of projectiles to choose from. Arrows that would pierce mail, carry messages, make a whistling noise through the air, or even deliver explosives. The mounted archer would fire at full gallop, getting off more than a dozen shots a minute. In comparison, the latest in European technology was the crossbow. Although powerful, it had only half the range of the Mongol bow and was slow and cumbersome. A typical European army of the time was made up of a motley collection of contingents, led by knights and local nobility, who owed different degrees of allegiance to the king. Unlike the Mongol leaders, the nobles may or may not have had experience of actual warfare. To make up the numbers, groups of peasants were often conscripted at the last minute. But the bulk of the army was still the cavalry. Some of these would have been knights from the various holy orders, the Knights Templar, Hospitallers, and Teutonic knights. Bound by religious ritual, celibacy, vows of poverty and devotion to the church, they were warrior monks. Though they spent much time practicing the arts and the rituals of war, they were not experienced at fighting as a part of disciplined units. They preferred individual hand-to-hand combat with their enemy, assuming, of course, they ever got that close. But the most obvious distinction between the two armies was the European development of protective armor. A full suit was very heavy and had a notable effect on the speed and mobility of a knight. Over woolen stockings he wore mail leggings that laced all the way up to the crutch. These alone weighed 20 pounds each. Then there was the mail shirt, another 50 or even 60 pounds. In contrast, the Mongol warrior wore a silk undershirt. This was a defense against arrows. The worst harm an arrow makes is when it's removed from a wound. The barbed head tears away at the flesh. But silk is not punctured by an arrow, but carries into the wound, twisting around the head of the arrow. So, by carefully pulling the shirt out of the wound, the arrow can be removed without tearing the flesh. The knight's mail tunic was ineffective against Mongol arrows. Over a felt tunic, the Mongol wore a leather cuirass. It weighed about 20 pounds. Probably the greatest handicap for Europeans was headgear. The mail coif weighed about 20 pounds. Then, finally, there was the bucket-shaped helm, another 10 pounds. With lance, shield, and broadsword, the European horseman expected his mount to carry more than 300 pounds into battle. It all looked impressive, but it was no match for the Mongols. Light, fast, and very mobile. The Mongols' objective was the great, flat, fertile plain of Hungary. There they could graze their horses before moving further into Europe. But their intelligence told them that the King of Hungary was related to various Polish princes. The Mongols had to ensure no Polish armies came to his aid. So, in a daring gamble, they divided their army. The invasion of Europe would be conducted on two simultaneous fronts, 600 miles apart. The larger army would march through the Carpathian Mountains, the gateway to Hungary and southern Europe. The smaller contingent would ride into Poland to draw off any armies that might go to the aid of the Hungarians. The invasion of Poland in February 1241 took the various Polish city-states completely by surprise. The Mongols drove towards Krakow, the most powerful of all the city-states. When a Mongol advance patrol was sighted from the steeple of St. Mary's Church, a trumpet alarm was sounded. The garrison set out to meet the invader. It was ambushed and destroyed. Most of Krakow's inhabitants fled in panic. Ever since that day, in March 1241, a trumpeter has sounded the alarm, and at precisely the same note, he abruptly stops his call. It was at that point, according to legend, that a Mongol arrow struck, silencing the trumpeter. At nearby monasteries, most of the monks were slaughtered, their relics and treasures plundered, the buildings destroyed. On this campaign, the Mongols seldom took prisoners. What could they do with them? What was the point? The city of Krakow was also leveled, along with Lublin and Breslau. By now, the alarm had been raised in all the cities along the Baltic. The call went out across Europe for armies to meet the invader. "500 miles to the south, the main Mongol army was making its way through the frozen passes of the Carpathian Mountains. The lightly defended Hungarian garrisons were surprised and quickly overwhelmed. Soon the Mongols were pouring through the valleys and down onto the Hungarian plains. They swept through Transylvania, Moldavia, and Wallachia before any defense could be mounted. For the Hungarians, it marked the beginning of one of the most terrifying chapters in their history, which was enshrined forever in the Great Hungarian Chronicle. In the capital, all hopes rested with King Bela. He commanded the greatest cavalry in Europe, but getting it onto the field was proving a problem. The Hungarian nobility refused to accept Bela's command, and as they argued amongst themselves, the Mongols moved inexorably westward. From their fortified positions overlooking the Danube, the Hungarian defenders looked out across the water at an alien host on the opposite bank. The Mongol commander drew up his army right under the nose of his opponent. Once again, the strategy was to draw the enemy out into the open, onto ground the Mongols had already selected. They prepared their battle lines and eagerly awaited reports from the army in Poland. Before they made any move against the Hungarians, the Mongol commanders needed to be certain the Poles would not be coming to the aid of the Hungarian king. In fact, relays of messengers were galloping south, bringing news that a large northern European army was gathering to confront the Mongols in Poland. The messengers claimed there were Teutonic knights, Knights Hospitaller, and even Templars from France. The result of the forthcoming encounter would decide the fate of the entire expedition and of the rest of Europe. The Europeans had gathered at this place, Liegnitz, near the German frontier. As the two armies faced up to each other, it was apparent the Mongols were outnumbered 3-2. To the defenders of Christendom, the Lord would grant a great victory, or the forces of darkness would prevail.